minutes from the July meeting. Any additions or corrections?
Move to approve minutes as written.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Auditor's report, Beth is not here. Did everybody get a chance to look at the email or needs to look at it?
Yeah, I looked at it. I know claim 182 on the ledger shows it was paid to Baker Tilly Municipal. That was actually Regions Bank, the 2015 bond payment. And I emailed Barry, so it just needs corrected. Everything's right except for late holds on it.
Okay.
And then there's two claim 181s. One of them was from the April timeframe. Paid to the Carroll County Economic Development for $77,1232. I don't know if we've got a duplication in the claim number or what, but maybe you can look into that, Barry. That's not here, but
I will.
that's it.
Do you remember off the top of your head? Laura? Okay, that's fine.
And I can't find the paper.
What was the June, 181 was
It was the one paid in July was, or you talking about the duplication?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's two of them, 181 in June to Baker Tilly for $65,2418. That's right, because I saw the invoice. But the one in April for 181,
Right,
we don't have a minute, so
right.
probably just use the claim number.
Any other questions on it?
Move to approve with those corrections.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Claims? Do we have any claims, Barry? Going too fast, Barry.
Claim 185, which is HWC Engineering for $661.
Anybody have any questions on the claim? Any divide?
Yeah.
You wanna explain that?
I think this is the start of the work on 4.0.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was anything
No,
specific about it.
just research on the, or on the right of way. And I think, I don't think our service crews been out yet, or when you get out there soon.
That's the color, it's older.
You have a motion?
Move to approve 181, or 185 in the amount of 661.
Second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Claim 185 for $661. HWC.
There's minutes, still need some shells.
Yeah, you wanna call?
No other claims in? Okay. So for business wise, we've got Rick Hall on the phone. And did Matt send you anything on what he was thinking or anything on that, Barry?
Yeah. He says,
Okay.
Wait, can you answer your question? What was the question?
For Matt, since Matt's not gonna be on the phone today with us, did he have any input?
Yes, he did. I think I emailed everybody his input, along with his estimated fee. I've written, I can give you copies if you need them. Got about 3 copies here. You received this email, didn't you?
I got it.
Chris, you got?
They calling that or? Calling that or? Okay.
Hello, Rick Hall.
Hi, Rick. Barry Emerson. Good to hear from you.
Hey, Barry, how are you?
I am well, thank you. I am presently at a meeting of the Carroll County Redevelopment Commission and Carroll County Redevelopment Authority. They are interested in a residential TIF. They're looking into the ins and outs and what the requirements are. And that's the reason for calling you. If you would like to give them a little summary of what a residential TIF would mean to the Carroll County Redevelopment Commission.
Well, as all of you know, the general TIF law is such that you just capture TIF from commercial property, but not from residential property. And a couple of years ago, the legislature determined that there was a need to use TIF in some circumstances to incentivize or spur residential housing. So the county would be able to designate an area that's a residential area that it could capture TIF from, and then could also then reinvest those dollars into infrastructure that helps residential development. And we can think about, depending on what your ultimate objectives are, how it might intertwine with your existing TIF areas and the dollars that you have, so that we can use the money in a way that best meets your objectives. One key finding that is necessary before you can create an area that is a residential housing TIF area is that you have to find that in the township, in the area that you're going to designate, that the number of single-family residential houses that were built in the previous 3 years, in 1918 and 17, 2019, 2018, and 2017, were less than 1% of the total residences in that township as of January 1st, 2020. So that's kind of an overview of how it works. Otherwise, you just establish it, the same way you would any of your normal TIF areas with a 4-step process where
why is that, Rick, Larry Trapp?
Well, I think there's been a lot of discussion. Historically, there's been a feeling that TIF aren't school corporations. And, you know, there's been, that's really way overstated. Is historically, you know, the school general fund was coming out of property taxes. So you removed assessed value from, the general rules, and that would affect the general fund of the school corporation. But now that the school corporation general fund is being funded by the state, the impact of TIF on school corporations is not nearly as significant as people thought historically. Nonetheless, I think there's a general feeling that schools should have some input. So if they're going to expand the scope of TIF, I think they felt they wanted to have some the school corporation be able to approve it.
Okay.
Let me ask you, Rick, can this residential TIF area be located outside our present TIF boundaries?
Well, as you recall, there's two areas that the Redevelopment Commission establishes. There's a broader economic development area, and that's the area which the Redevelopment Commission in the county have determined is important to development, right, for economic development. Then within that larger economic development area, you can designate TIF allocation areas, and it's from these smaller areas where the actual TIF is captured. So often the allocation area, the TIF allocation area from where the TIF is captured, and the economic development area, the broader area for which the TIF is used, often those two areas have the same boundaries. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's a larger area that you deem is needed for development, but you only want to capture TIF from a portion of that area. In this case, whatever you would designate as a residential TIF area would have to be part of a larger economic development area. So if the area that you're thinking of is not currently within the boundaries of the economic development area, we would have to amend the economic development area boundaries, and we would do that just at the same time through the same process that we create the residential TIF area.
If the board proceeds with a residential TIF, I understand that they will use the proceeds or the taxes generated by that residential area to pay off a bond. Will the bond look, which I know is rather skimpy income, the way I look at it, residential units for paying off a bond, would the bank or bankers approve a bond that stands alone based upon that residential income from taxes?
Likely not, and often a lender will not purchase a bond that's payable from speculative TIF. And by speculative, I mean that the construction has not already occurred and been assessed. That they often, in that instance, and the same would apply here, would require some kind of other source of security, whether that's a pledge of your other TIF revenues from your other allocation areas, or if it's some kind of property tax backup or other tax backup, a guarantee from the developer. I don't know if you have like a certain residential developer
Thank you, Rick.
Rick, I wanna follow up on that, so if the bond was issued by I'm gonna say the IPC TIF, and then a residential TIF was formed to catch increment, and the IPC TIF, because it's in the economic interest of Indiana Packers, would pay, the bond and then be reimbursed by the second TIF, the housing TIF. That arrangement would be within the law, correct?
Yeah, that's why I say depending on what you want to accomplish, we should look at how we would be able to capitalize on the revenue stream that you already have from IPC. And that revenue stream might be sufficient, I just don't know what kind of, revenue there is compared to what kind of debt service you'd be looking at, but that itself might be sufficient. But you could structure it in a way that those dollars were, could be used, for, each other. In other words, you could advance or use as security your IPC revenues and then use your residential revenues as they come in to reimburse, the costs.
I have one other question, Rick, it's Josh again. I wanna make sure that I understand this correctly. We can set up a contract with a developer, and then as those lots are sold, there's some mechanism that some percentage of a lot sale or some fee structure can be, repaid to the RDC for putting in that infrastructure. So you would get TIF, you would collect TIF and be able to reimburse the IPC TIF from the sale of, real estate. Similarly to what we've done at the HHIP.
Yeah, you could do that. You could have that kind of agreement with the residential developer.
Does it matter on the length of time if you get a bond on residential, Rick?
It can't be more than the TIF area would expire, 25 years after you issued any bond or entered into any other obligation that's payable from the TIF from the residential area. As a practical matter, you're not gonna, it's not, likely that you borrow money for a term that exceeded 25 years anyway. But so 25 years is kind of the outside limit.
Okay.
Based upon the current economic circumstances and the current health problems, what's the thought on establishing a residential TIF at this point in time?
Well, I think that's just a county by county specific, question. I don't know what the appetite is for, residential development in your area. I don't know how, strongly, developers are interested. I think one way to approach it is and it's commonly done, not necessarily from a residential perspective, but from just a development perspective generally, is
the law change allowing residential TIF, and how many, are you aware of that exist in the state currently, and how successful are they?
It just came into effect in 2019, and I personally have not worked on one, but I can check in our firm and see, you know, how many there are in the state. And personally, I don't think it's been capitalized on very, very frequently.
I think Rushville has one.
Yeah, there's one in Princeton too. Yeah.
Where do you guys think they are?
I know there's one in Rushville.
Yeah. Actually, Matt said he worked on one down at the Toyota plant.
Well, I can check that. I mean, we do work for Rushville and Greensburg, so I can see, and that might be a good way to explore whether this is a good tool for you guys, is to what's their experience been, and how does that compare to what you're considering?
Rick, has there been anything done or a study or something to see whether if there's a minimum or a maximum of how many residential houses, whether it's a good deal or not? Is like, especially on a minimum, is there, how many houses is a good deal and how many houses aren't?
I mean, I think that's a, you know, just a location by location analysis. I think if you're looking to develop, I mean, I think you have to want to develop, you know, a neighborhood or a subdivision or something, not, you know, 4 or 5 homes, because what, you know, it doesn't seem like it's gonna have a meaningful impact to your community. But what's the meaningful impact for, each community is gonna be a very specific answer.
Did everybody get questions that they wanted to ask Rick? Because it's 1:24 on my clock, and he has to leave us at 1:25.
Is there, would you like me to look into the Rushville and Greensburg situations and see if, I can get, some background on that?
Yeah, Princeton as well.
Yeah, they said Princeton too.
Okay.
I think that's where the Toyota plant is located, and some reason I think Matt has stated that Princeton had a residential tip.
Do you guys have a map or anything of the area that you're thinking about that might be helpful for me to understand it better?
We can get a copy of it, Rick, for you.
Really, we're in the bare infancy of this project, just looking into which way, you know, how meritorious the project would be.
Let me see if we can find some other examples, and that might be insightful to you. Can you meet the 1% test in that there hasn't been growth, or the houses that came in the last 3 years in the township don't exceed 1% of the total residences?
We received the data from the Area Planning Commission, and it looks favorable, and you agree with that, Brian?
Yes.
But
We didn't look at it township wise though.
and that's how the data was presented to more. So I look at it in the aggregate, I agree, but
Yeah.
township by township, there may be some anomalies there, but, would it be your advice to fill out the form to get to get the clearance from the state to move ahead before we did anything else, or what would your opinion be on that? 'Cause I guess there's some form you have to fill out to start the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can't meet that test, it's all moving. So I don't see any downside. It is township by township. The statute says you make this measurement by township, and it's, you know, comparing the total residences at the start of the year, so January 1st, 2020, and then it's the number that have come on in the last
questions for Rick? All right, Rick, if you would, see what you can dig up on that information on that and, send a copy back to Barry.
I'll do it.
All right.
Thanks, nice talking to you guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Rick.
Rick, appreciate it.
All right, see ya.
Bye.
I know Rushville was looking in March of this year to create that TIF, so, I mean, I don't know, they mentioned that they were gonna create it, and, March was a bad time of the year, so, I don't know if they, yeah. Some, might have been a delay, but they were talking about doing a residential TIF in March.
I'm assuming that no more counties have done that. If we do extra paperwork, it's gonna go through pretty fast instead of slow because they don't have any other. So I guess I'm looking at this, I don't see us foregoing getting all the paperwork done before we get there.
What?
Let's make sure we're gonna do this before we go ahead and do the paperwork. But you have to just ask Rick.
That was-
That's how I feel.
That was his advice, was to fill it out.
I know that,
Well, I thought his advice was to make sure you meet the test.
yes, I agree.
I mean, and is that an
That's-
application
It's
process?
a 2-page or 3-page thing that has to be filled out and sent to the state, and then they say, yes, you qualify, or no, you
I
don't.
mean, they basically check your records of that 1% test, essentially.
Right.
But Baker Tilly's saying 12.5, not to exceed 15 to do that.
To do that.
To do that, right.
No, it's not for that one form, to get 12.5, it's to facilitate the TIF.
I understand that, well, I think you're getting a cart before the horse, why send paperwork into the state if we haven't made a decision we're gonna do this now or not?
Well, I guess my point would be, if you were gonna apply for a loan, let's say, and you had to qualify for an SBA program or whatever, would the banker fill out the form and do all the underwriting before they said, yes, you qualify this program, or no, you don't qualify for this program? So,
Who would fill out the form for us if we didn't want to, Josh?
well, I think we could have Rick or Barry, well, I assume Barry would run point on it, and just coordinate it with, Rick, but.
Well, it seems to me to be a simple calculation that, you know you're gonna get approved on because the figures are such. I would agree with Larry that I don't think it's necessary to start the project, and get the loan. The state will look at it, okay, they started the project. When maybe we're a year down the road, 2 years down the road, whatever the case may be, we're not even proceeding with the project.
Well, I mean, the worst case scenario would be, in my opinion, we spend any more time talking about this, or put some cost into this thing with attorneys, and then come to find out after the fact that, oh, sorry, the projects that you brought forth aren't gonna qualify. I just, it's crazy to me to.
I think we need to back up and go back to meeting with, whether it's EDC, the city of Delphi, or whoever, and, there was 10 years ago or so, a long-term plan, and I think our economic development area goes clear up to about the school, somewhere in there, and they, at that time, when that was all done, and I think maybe Rick was involved in it. I think we met over that side of the street somewhere, I don't remember exactly where. And, there was a conversation about putting a street between 421 and Dayton Road, and that was identified for housing. And if the city believes that's where they want the housing to go, it seems to me that we should concentrate our money in an economic development area that's already been defined, even though it's been shelved for a while. So maybe we need to readdress that with the people that was involved and find out, is that where you want it to go? Because if that's where you want it to go, then maybe we reach out to the private sector and find out if there's any private developers that are interested in doing anything out there. And if they are, you know, will they do it themselves? Will they not do it themselves? You know, that's where we could come in and be a part to a significant number of lots, if indeed that's where they want the growth to happen. Maybe they don't want the growth to happen there, and if that's the case, does the economic development area need to be redefined and include another, you know, maybe it's east, west, wherever. But we probably don't have the resources to do this over and over and over. And it doesn't appear to me we have much of a plan about what it is we're asking for, other than does our data based on new housing starts qualify? And if you read this letter, I think it requires an analysis of the proposed area and the impact on property taxes, and that's to be a part of that. So I don't know how we put that together when we don't even know where we're going. I mean, we haven't really defined what the project is that we're really working on, in my opinion.
Well, and part of the reason why we haven't defined it more closely is to protect the property owner and, you know, that they're not in a position yet to advertise exactly what they're looking to do, which is pretty commonplace. I think you're in a unique position right now with a new mayor getting ready to come on board. We know Mayor Evans prioritized housing development. The new administration, once it's in place, might have different priorities. So you have partnering, and you have a new city council in place. So I think that building that relationship with the city council and the new administration, and finding out what kind of priority it is for them. The strategic plan that we did for the TIF district, which HWC helped us do, you know, that was what we thought made sense. But we've already found areas that we had earmarked for residential have been, are being pursued for industrial project right now. So so some of that swath of land that we had already identified is probably not going to be available for residential. But the property that we are kind of looking at is pretty close to the boundary. So as a person who has zero influence or authority, I would suggest, I like the idea of you guys meeting, maybe joint session or something with the council after the new mayor is appointed, definitely talking to the mayor, seeing what kind of incentives the city has to offer on the table for residential development. I also think getting Delphi schools involved, because they're the ones that benefit from new families moving into the community and new students sitting in the seats, and get them to be if they're supportive of this, have them help be cheerleaders for this project. And then once you kind of can put together what a package would look like, then meeting with developers and finding out, are these the incentives that would help prompt you to do this development? If not, what do you guys need to see? And then you guys can come back to the table and try to put something together. But yeah, they have to be incentives that the developers want to see. And the more people you can leverage, if you're doing it outside of city limits, but it's gonna have city utilities, the city still might wanna incentivize, but then you could work with the commissioners, and maybe there are some ways to have the county commissioners help incentivize this project too, residential. Because everyone appreciates the importance of new residential development, and try to leverage as many incentives as possible.
That's kind of along the lines I think we need to get a meeting together with the powers to be, the different organizations that need to be involved. I'm looking at you, maybe you're the person to organize that up, I don't know. But, you know, where do they want this to happen?
And how badly do they want it to happen?
Yeah.
Because, I think it's going to, like we discovered with the Hoosier Heartland Industrial Park, we knew that the numbers didn't make sense for private developers. We went out to private developers. I love private dollars, but the numbers just didn't make sense for you didn't get the ROI. And so if we wanted good industrial ground, we had to do something ourselves. I think we're gonna see the same thing with residential development. We're going to have to incentivize it, to help make the numbers make sense for private developers.
So I guess we need to take the issue and send a letter to the mayor.
Well, we don't know who the mayor.
Once we get,
Whoever that may
once we get the new mayor in, and to the school board, and I think the EDC, then we're gonna sit down.
Town council.
Get city council.
Yeah.
I even think the commissioners would be very helpful to have in that as well. And county council. I guess you get Josh, you get to cover a lot of bases.
Yeah, I guess you start thinking about this, okay, when can you do it? And we don't know where we're at with the city mayor, we don't know when, for sure, all we know is in 2 weeks that Shane won't be there.
A week,
A week now,
yeah.
so.
Well, I like the idea of overwhelming the new mayor and getting in right away.
Let me turn this here.
Please don't. Those are gonna come back to haunt me. But we would need to get a bigger room, much larger room if we're gonna bring these groups together.
That's basically it.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, somebody give me some thoughts, if you wanna try to do this in the next month.
Well, I think you need to have, somebody kind of spearhead this effort. Somebody sitting over here in orange.
Brian, you're lucky.
I'm probably blue today. To kind of encapsulate what the discussion is surrounded around, what goes into that, who those stakeholders are, and then how to pull off a meeting of that size in this environment. Where and when and how, and is it just representatives from each of those groups to try to keep the meetings small? Or is it all those bodies in their entirety? I don't know, I didn't do that.
Would the EDC be willing to work with the RDC and make this work? I'll help with getting it done more.
Yeah, so the Delphi City Council meets the first Monday, but that is Labor Day, next month. That would be the entity I would be most concerned about getting to a day meeting. I think it would be easier to get them to an evening meeting, Debbie, if you agree with that?
Probably, yeah.
I like the idea of a joint meeting. It's obviously up to you guys, but I think inviting them to a joint meeting, open to the public, and whoever can show up would be great, but that way, I think ideally you'd want a majority of the entities to be represented. And we can make it an informational, we put together a presentation, have Barry repeat Rick's wise words at a much discounted price.
Are you saying an evening meeting then, or a day
Yeah,
meeting?
I think an evening meeting would be, you'd have the best bet of getting more people there. So the Delphi City Council will probably meet on the 8th.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys do.
Well, they have board of works before council meeting.
2016, I thought it was 10.
Is that at
I'll
5:30?
their meeting will be on the
5:30.
14th,
5:30?
so
I think you're looking at, September, October. I mean, I know you want to appoint the new mayor, but I gotta tell you, you don't know who that is. Yeah. Don't really want to.
Can you mute your video and tell me who you think it might be?
No,
Because I am dying to know.
You know, sometimes. Almost trouble.
It is, 'cause
But I think we need
We
to
need
drag
to-
the old maps out of what the economic
we
development.
need to have a
development area
presentation,
was.
we
Yes.
need to say, here's
This
what
was
we're talking
done.
about, and let's get everybody, is everybody on the same page?
Yeah.
So anytime after the 8th, you think, Laura, I'm asking questions now. I don't know. If you wanted, we'll just set up a date and go with it.
Couldn't we get on the agenda at their meeting and do it that
That's
way?
the problem with that.
Or at least introduce them to the idea of a meeting.
Alright.
So, yeah, so I'll reach out and get RDC on the agenda for the 7th and just tell them that this is a meeting that we're planning to do.
You know, I'll meet with you and we'll discuss it.
Yeah.
This morning, we'll talk about
No, but,
I mean, just to make the presentation that you're.
the point is that, and if we're looking at that earlier plan,
Yes.
that designated area that is privately owned, do we need to involve, what that current ownership is in this discussion process? Because that land may or may not even be available for our development. I think,
I think at this point in time, we gotta just say, okay, there's a property owner out here. Don't know whether he's gonna sell or not, but do we wanna pursue this further down the road here? Is this what we're looking at, or do we wanna change our aspect or our looks of where we wanna look at residential? And go with that. I don't wanna mention any names, I don't wanna do anything on the property. I just wanna say, this is what we dedicated 10 years ago. Do we still wanna look at this, or do we wanna look at?
still look like the direction that we most likely would head if this is available.
Right. All right,
It might make sense to invite some of the property owners in that
Yeah.
area. I learned from West Lafayette, if you talk about other people's property,
you better have.
In
Without
terms of
and
what
announce
we're
it.
gonna do before we ask you whether we can do it? Yeah.
yeah,
So.
doesn't go over well.
It's stakeholders and they would
Yes.
speak,
Yeah,
come to a public meeting.
right. Or it'll be available, like we'll have it on Zoom or something where they can click in and watch.
All right, does
and you
anybody
can-
have anything else?
The only thing I said, you don't know what's out there. I mean, we don't know what's out, what could be out there. And maybe something you wanna look at and compare to, you may wanna put a request for proposals out there that says, the RDC is looking at, housing development within Carroll County. And you can define that area if we do townships or whatever, and say, developers, property owners, come to us and we can talk about it and figure out what that best project. You may get none, you may get 10 different ones, you may get some that you, like I say, we're not even thinking about. That's the thing. I mean, we've talked to one property owner, but are there others out there that you may be interested in? I don't know if that's the way to go, but that's an idea. I don't know, Barry, what you think.
We just did it on video.
Who would draw up the RFP in a situation like that?
You could have HWC draft it with input from, from all the different entities.
And again, that's a little hard to do if you don't know where it's gonna happen.
Well,
Yeah, but you leave it,
The
you leave it.
geography is kind of irrelevant. I mean, let's go back to the mission is to put housing within proximity of Indiana Packers. And Rick said in the call, if you need to adjust the the economic development zone, you're well within your rights to do that, because the impact is in bringing housing, which Indiana Packers desperately wants, in the community. So, I mean, the where is probably the least important thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, except your township specific in terms of how you go forward.
Right.
I think
And it's
almost,
just-
I think
it's
almost
kind
every
of-
township qualified,
Well-
if I remember correctly.
I just
I
think you
agree,
should
it kind of goes back
include
to my first point.
the adjacent city if they want to expand. Then you should try to expand adjacent to the city, especially if you've already got a defined area. It may not be the defined area anymore, but at one time it was. I mean, it ought to happen within a plan, a bigger plan than just something here and something there and something there, and then try to fit the middle. I don't know, that's what it seems to me. So if
I agree.
Delphi, powers to be, and whoever can, you know, say, you know, we want the residential to happen on the Ballon Farm. Well, the Ballon Farm's not in our defined area, right? It's on the Lee. And if that's the case, there's already water out there. So then, if that's where they're gonna focus on that happening for the next 10 years, then maybe we can go do something else and not be a part of that deal. And know that we're not gonna be asked to provide resources to make it happen.
I think the main thing is we sit down and board meal, sit down and try to draw up something and get it out to all these different entities. Go from that, usually we can go back from there and get out, then we can get meetings set. Okay, is that agreeable? Okay. Anything else to discuss? Barry? What? Brian, you got anything?
Lunch.
Oh.
Just went to- I didn't play ball.
All right, next meeting's gonna be on the 14th, September, 1 o'clock. And any information that I can come up with between now and then will be sent to Barry, and Barry will send it out. Okay? Thank everybody.
Ken, did you want to bring anything forward?